Thank you so much for staying until the last session. We're going to wrap up the whole journey from Seoul to Singapore, Epoch Seoul and Epoch Singapore with this session. And thank you so much, Nu and Shayon, for sharing your time with us as well. Let us start today's last session with a short intro. I'll start. My name is John Park, and I run a small validator called A41. We're based in Seoul, and we're trying to make an impact as an APAC validator these days. So that's why we're hosting this event, and thank you so much for being here together with us.
Hi, I'm Nu. I'm a co-founder and GP of Rubik. We are a single family office VC. We are based between New York and Hong Kong, and I like to say that our North Star is to help our Western teams commercialize for a global audience, and so we do a lot of work cross-border. Yeah.
I'm Shayon. I'm a partner on the investment team at Multicoin. We're an investment firm. Our mandate is to invest in crypto and crypto-adjacent tech. We run a hedge fund, a series of venture funds, and excited to be here.
Well, this is a very humble introduction from both firms, I think. I have one question to start with today. Like a lot of people talk about infra in crypto, and we all define it like accordingly to our needs, I guess. But from investors' perspective, I'm quite curious about how you're going to define crypto infra investment. What would be considered as infra from your end? And your point of view, and your firm's point of view as well. Let's start off with Nu.
Yeah, I mean, infra is, layer one blockchains, services, middleware. I guess the definitions are pretty straightforward. I think, for us as a fund, we have more of a consumer background, and so I think there's no shortage of infra founders. I think people will build infra for a very long time in the space. I think that consumer is a lot more niche, and so that's like where we would like to focus on in the next 9 to 12 to 24 months. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think my general thesis in investing is I like investing in things that are super close to the L1. So things that really touch the metal, like MEV markets, block space auctions, order flow auctions, bridges, interop solutions, things of that nature. And then I like things that are right at the other end, so like straight up consumer applications, things that own customer attention, explicitly want to own the relationship with the end user. And so I think of that specific layer of the stack, which is, I define it as sort of proximity to the L1 and how much control you have over transaction inclusion inside of a block. I think some of my large investments in that space have been things that are explicitly trying to do that, as opposed to, the indexing layer or the query layer that sits in the middle. I generally think of those as slightly more commoditized. I think the more leverage and control you have over block space, the more interesting infra is by that perspective. And so that's roughly how I tend to categorize it.
Thank you. I like to start off with in retrospect, because lately I think there was a lot of discussion on Twitter, at least saying that we're all investing into infra, as Nu said, consumer area is sort of a niche area these days, at least until so far. But in retrospect, in 2023 and 2024, if you have made investment into infra, because this is a broader area, what were the most exciting things that you have invested into so far, and why do you think they were exciting, and why do you think they are still exciting? Let's start off with Shayon, if Nu.
Sure. Yeah. Well, so like I was saying, my core thesis is that I think there are two things that are scarce: there's block space and attention. So things that are close to the L1 or things that are explicitly applications. The things that have been most successful in the last 18 to 24 months for me have been a combination of the two of those things, specifically DeepIn's, physical infrastructure networks. Now, those are not traditionally what most people would define as infra in crypto, because things that look like Helium or things that look like Render or IO or Hive Mapper, for that instance, these are not things that you would traditionally categorize as infra but you are explicitly doing that, and building out supply side capacity to serve a variety of different use cases, productized as an application because your contributors are like net new people. So sort of a combination of applications and infra, which is what Deepins are, and those have been sort of my teams that operate in that space. And frankly, every single check I've written this year has been a Deepin or a Deepin, right? And so it's sort of like, not the traditional, like I was saying, right? Like the on-ramp or the indexing layer or the query layer, there's a lot of room for those types of businesses. There's a lot of room for things that are trying to play around with new notions of economic security or whatever. There's all kinds of fun stuff there. But I think the infrastructure that I'm personally most excited about is the stuff that doesn't map directly to crypto in that way, but uses sort of permissionless value transfer rails to build net new networks that are both application and infrastructure in some capacity.
So one quick question back to you, Shayon. Like you mentioned that you're particularly interested in block space as well, and feels like when people think of like Multicoin, we tend to think of like alternative L1s like Solana or Aptos or these type of like other L1s, not necessarily ETH or ETH adjacent fields, but usually in the infra builders space, when we talk about block space, we usually are talking about ETH. Why aren't you, like, did you make a lot of investment into like ETH block space areas, or like if you haven't, and if you're still focusing on like other L1s like block space, especially like Solana, like what would be the reason and why? I'm just curious about why.
Yeah, it's no surprise that we like integrated chains. I've made a ton of investments in block space around Solana. For instance, Jiro, which we led the first round in August of 2021. Those guys have been building block space auctions for Solana for the longest time and have accumulated a ton of stake and are building out new lines of product along that core thesis. They just announced restaking a month and a half ago, and I think there's like a handful of teams building things there. We invested in Fastlane, which is in building interesting sort of MEV primitives for Monad. Again, sort of in that similar sort of design space here. But, infra as defined as AVS or something adjacent to restaking is, I feel like, unnecessarily narrow, right? Like we've written checks into things like Pith and Wormhole, which are foundational layers that are serving customers at whether they're operating over the EVM or elsewhere. In general, there is some combination of state and assets that lives in some set of places. Ultimately, we want to serve, we want to make sure we're building and investing in teams that are serving that state in the most meaningful way possible. We just have views on where that state exists, so we invest there. And ultimately, I think a lot of our portfolio companies do end up touching things that touch EVM state, right? But yeah.
I mean, yeah, I think cross-chain infra was obviously there were all the cross-chain wars, probably about 2-3 years ago. We did layer 0. That's okay. We can still be friends.
So did we, candidly, but yeah.
Yeah. I think where we as two GPs who have like a more of a consumer background, we wanted to invest in things that we felt would abstract away a very complex UI, a very complex US for an average user. And layer 0 you're not supposed to see it, right? If you're interacting with it. And I think that's I think that's what we probably should aspire to do more of. Yeah.
So if you were to choose, in retrospect, like the most exciting or interesting projects that you have invested in the infra area, would you pick layer 0?
Yeah, I think so.
What about you, Shayon?
I pick Helium. I think Helium's the most interesting infra, or actually the most interesting project in crypto, period. But yeah.
Let's then fast forward to way ahead. I think you guys are pretty clear in terms of your stance, and going back to the criticisms I talked about, there are too much emphasis being put on infrastructure is something that people always talk about. It's always people are saying, oh, we have no consumer apps, or we have no consumer stuff. There is no iPhone moment yet for crypto, and it's because everybody's pouring money into L1s or L2s because it's easy for VC to print money was basically like these are the criticisms. But would you agree that, or what would you say that, like, do we have like enough and sustainable working infra for that iPhone moment to be actually be realized? Like, are we in a state that we can say, hey, we want to go forward for the consumer like apps, but like, do we have like infra that is actually like available, like to make it like working, like consumer D apps for millions and billions of people? I'm just curious about your take.
Yeah, I mean, I think you have to start with like the use case first, right? And like maybe the use case isn't necessarily more financialization of like your friends, or but maybe it's actually consumer apps that you might find in like a Web2 world, and you are building it with Web3 Rails. Infra is, if you build a lot of infra, it's like having a really big highway and like maybe not enough cars on it. And so there's, for us, because we are mostly a single family office VC, we have the autonomy to be both experimental and also patient. And so like on the experimental side, there's Berachain, which is proof of liquidity consensus, right? Quite experimental. And then on the other side, we have Agora, which is building, stablecoin, to compete with existing incumbents like Tether and Circle. So I mean, obviously, like I think Shayon's going to have a different view because Multicoin's just a much bigger fund. But I guess it just depends on where your incentives are. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we can talk about the giant momentum trade that is infra across crypto funding in every single stage, for the next hour. But I don't think we need to repeat that story. What I will say is that I've spent a lot of time over the last few years thinking about what crypto is useful for, what consumer applications look like. I've done every version of funding, creator platforms and things that look, that you would think would be traditional maps, like crypto rails would map correctly over Web2 equivalents of. I think what I've realized is that crypto is about money, and that means crypto is about trading and payments. And payments are sort of like a trade is basically two payments, So it's like really the fundamental thing that's happening here is value exchange. And I think what you're seeing this year is the application layer honing in on that a little bit more, which is teams that are explicitly going to market and saying, we are an app, are treating transactions as a first-class citizen, which is to say, they realize that either they are a new venue for a new type of commerce or new type of economic activity, or they are creating new assets that are only possible over crypto rails. I think of DPINs and DVINs as sort of in that second category, as like internet native, crypto native new assets being built. And I think of, at the other end, we invested in a live streaming company called Unlonely, which, we invested with the thesis of Twitch with tokens. The idea was that streamers are super online, they have a proclivity to spend, they're super internet native. It sounds like you could embed some crypto primitives in there. And he's sort of like run a ton of experiments. The founder, Brian, who everyone should spend some time with, he's super fun. He's actually in Singapore. But he's actually gone in the other direction where he's saying the platform doesn't actually make sense. We're never going to be able to compete with Twitch. So he's sort of going in the direction of producing shows and becoming like a media company owned by a specific crypto asset. But again, the thing that's important is value transfer. I think the rails for value transfer have been around for the last 3 years. I think we've had parity in terms of performance on these systems for quite some time now. What we haven't had is sort of founders and teams knowing exactly what to build. It feels like early 2000s web era where you've sort of had this percolation of ideas over like the equivalent would be the 90s, running Webvan in that experimentation. We're between Webvan and Instacart right now, effectively. And that gap, I hope it isn't 14 years. I don't think it will be. But I think the bottleneck is not infrastructure. The bottleneck is knowing what to do with the primitives. Yeah.
I mean, I think Blackbird's like probably a good example of like a very real Web2, real world use case. And you're thinking, well, loyalty, you don't necessarily need that to be on chain, right? But I think what they do is they just abstracted away the experience. Like points are tokens. Your loyalty card is an NFT that travels with you. Like I think maybe more of this thinking is needed, and just more experiments around this stuff that isn't, yeah, another, financializing you as, yeah, like, nothing against friend tech, but like, wow.
So News funding more social token platforms. If you guys are out there building. No, but that's such a good example, right? Like the story is so clear for merchants, right? Like the amount that they lose on interchange fees and merchant fees is absurd, right? And so like using loyalty as a Trojan horse to get into the payment systems is, I think, and there's no one better to do it than Ben. I think that story is profound, and like it starts off small, and you don't see it, and even if you go to a Blackbird restaurant in New York, they don't like advertise it yet, right? But it's gonna take, these things start until you get the UX ossified enough and you feel comfortable enough that you can scale it up. And I think that's emblematic of where we're at as the application layer. Like everyone is like running those small experiments right now, making sure that it's ready. And then when it is ready, it'll work.
Quite curious on, I mean, both of you are essentially saying that, I mean, I love the analogy that there is a highway with like, no or like very like few cars. I mean, like, and we, like, as a validator, we're the ones who are like, maintaining that highway and making the money out of it. So we want more highways, but like, yeah, and more cars too, essentially. But like, that is not our problem. It's the L1's problem. But harking back to that point, and both of you are essentially saying that, like, hey, we do have actually like, infrastructure that is essentially like ready for the iPhone moment. It's but the bottleneck is actually like the apps that are not able to like, break into people's minds or markets, or like in terms of like go to market or whatever, right? But would you, as an investor, right? So it's a little different from crypto enthusiasts. Like we want more like adoption, but from like investors' point of view, would you say that like the current flooding, not flooding, but like it's dying down a little bit, like compared to like the wave before that we were in? But like, would you say that there will be more L1s that are going to be popping up in the market, or do you think that like with the current criticisms and people's like sort of like breakthrough, like saying that, oh, we need more consumer, not like infra, that would that lead the investors to allocate more towards the consumer side? Or like, do you still think that like, even if that is what we still believe in, we will still continue to invest into L1s, and like there will be more L1s that we're going to be seeing like 2025 and 2026? A really important question for me.
Yeah, I don't know what other investors are going to do.
Just your opinion.
I think there's always a story, and some stories are more compelling than others, right? Hyperliquid as a story is much more compelling than the nth generalized sort of whatever EVM compatible thing with like a slightly different configuration. Like no one cares. I think strong application for L1s are asset ledgers is the thing that I've realized, right? Like people, like they're functionally a way for people to say, I own these many assets, and they're like, to have strong guarantees around what I do with those, right? If there are L1s where there are new assets that are uniquely tradable there, I think there are stories to be told. Like there is a case to be made for them to exist. Yeah, I've just been thinking a lot about Hyperliquid in that context, and so I think it's interesting. We're not investors. We're just, I mean, I'm personally just a fan. But, in general, I don't think there should be new general purpose environments and canvases for people to come in and say, please come and build something here. Like, I don't think that approach makes sense. I hope it stops. And we are most likely not going to fund experiments that look like that. But if there are strong application first founders that have found some meaningful, answer to the question, like, can this, like, is there a reason for this to not live on an existing L1 that has canonical state and standard network effects around it and things of that nature? If there is a good answer to that question, which is like, I can't build this on an existing L1, sure, why not? But I would make the argument that 99.9% of things do not fall into that category. And for that reason, I hope there aren't a ton of newer ones because no one needs them.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of incentive for, founders to build new L1s and push the envelope on like throughput and all those things. And that's part of the reason why we invested in Layer 0. We're like, people are just gonna be building L1s probably forever, so we probably need something to like, simplify all that fragmentation for users and enterprises. I mean, that was like, I guess VCs, like, you're always figuring out how to pivot at which point in the cycle, to do either infra or consumer. I think there's enough infra as is, yeah.
I prepared this question, but like I feel like I shouldn't ask this question, so I'm just debating myself. But
Do it.
Do it.
if you were to make like a bet on the crypto infra area next year, right? Like setting aside like new L1s, let's talk like probably pipe network that like Multicoin has invested would be falling into that category as well, right? Where would you be looking in terms of like crypto infra the most? And following up on that, like what's your guys' plans on like investing into like ZK or FHE like areas? Like, and do you foresee that these like very like future oriented like technology stack as like something that is investable in the near term future, or like I'm just curious about like how you guys are approaching 2025. And I know like New would probably be like, oh no, we want consumer. But like if there were to be a scenario where you would be investing into any crypto infra areas, like I'm just curious about where and like why. And if like you can answer the ZK and FHE questions too, like that would be awesome. Who wants to start?
I can kick it off. So yeah, Multicoin's led sort of 2 investments at this point in FHE adjacent spaces. We led a large round in Zama, which we believe to be the preeminent cryptography team working on those on FHE and things adjacent to it. And we led an investment in Phoenix, which is an execution environment that's built on top of Zama or using a lot of those primitives. FHE. I feel like these things get bundled together, like FHE, ZK, MPC, like all get thrown into the same sort of buzzwords. They're doing very different things. The goal for FHE, which is, and the reason we have invested so heavily in these teams is that is sort of the end state, that is the holy grail for compute over data, which is getting to compute over encrypted data. They are solving for a very different set of problems than the standard kind of ZK virtual machine or generalized virtual machine, whether it's at the instruction set layer or any sort of at the compiler layer, whatever you're putting into a circuit is fundamentally trying to solve for different things, not necessarily privacy or whatever it is, right? Over the long arc of time, we generally believe that the scientists in those rooms will figure it out, and they are the best researchers in the world solving those problems. And we just can sort of see a market for that spans way beyond just the cryptographic, just having a sort of privacy or like a privacy first L1. Like every Web2 database in the world could theoretically be a customer for Zama. Every payments company in the world could be a partner to Phoenix, right? Like we think of this as a much longer scenario, but yes, of course, there is some science risk associated in all of these things. We feel good about that risk. On investments for next year, I think I've made it clear at this point that like I think deepens are the things that are actually net new interesting, and it sort of comes back to the conversation we're having right now, which is like you really want to fund applications, and deepens are applications like in infrastructure costume, basically. You know, like the fact that you know, you buy a Hive Mapper dash cam and drive around and get some tokens, that's a consumer application. Just because the demand side for that is like a mapping company somewhere in California doesn't mean that that's not a consumer application, right? So I'm generally excited about new deepins. We just led an investment we announced a few days ago into an energy deepin called Fuse Energy. We're trying to solve the renewables energy coordination problem. And I think we're just scratching the surface of like types of problems and types of founders, like realizing that you can use crypto as an asset class to like incentivize and create new behaviors and networks around them. So, yeah.
I think Shayon did a good job.
Would I take it as a no? I won't invest into infra next year.
I mean, you know, there's the infra investors and there's the consumer investors. You know, you need both. Yeah.
Then can I ask? Like everybody talks about consumer and like consumer DApps are needed, but nobody kind of like touches upon like, you know, what could be the like things that could trend like next year, or like if as an investor, if you see like you're probably seeing a lot of projects coming to you and asking for money. So like what intrigued you the most so far, like in terms of consumer DApps, and what would you be looking at or looking forward to see like next year in terms of consumer DApps then?
Yeah, I think prediction markets are interesting, and like poly market as an example, right? I mean, it's like not every user of poly market is going to understand the statistical analysis of all this stuff, and so like a prediction market for like maybe I don't know, celebrity gossip, like things that Ben and JLo break up, like things that like probably like interest more than just a certain demographic of like I think maybe honestly I am a woman, so like building for more women, you know, is probably a good place to start. I think the reason why consumer is so difficult is because it does require you to have good basic understanding of like a user acquisition funnel, a pipeline, and that doesn't, you know, that's not bots. That's not like Sybil hunting. And you know, I think,
Essentially though, like, you know, I think it all goes back to like dipping or like in a way that because like maybe I'm just, you know, I'm too low IQ to understand the consumer side, and because that's why I'm doing the validator business, I guess. But when I think about consumer DApps making money with crypto, like the only way that they could actually do is with the data they're actually like collecting from the users, and doesn't it actually go against the ethos of like, you know, crypto at the same time? So that's why it's so hard to like create a consumer DApps, but still like, you know.
well, like Etherscan's a consumer application, right? They make 50 million on ads. There's nothing wrong with that.
That's true. But like a lot of the like DeSci projects that are funded by, let's say, Pfizer, or like a lot of the projects that are aiming to like, you know, acquire a lot of users, they seem like they have a plan of selling those data to either like I don't know, insurance companies or like those type of companies. But isn't that like the reason why they have token and all that isn't that just hindering their like user acquisition?
Yeah, the whole crypto is useful for like the big platform owns your data. We let you own your data. Like I think that's bullshit. Like that's,
I think that's like gaslighting.
Yeah, that's like like Instagram monetizes for a very good reason, because like it knows who you are and it can deliver high quality ads to you, and it's a two-sided marketplace that everyone is opting into. It's very good at that. Crypto should not try to go after that, right? Like that's a very specific thing that we will never see unbundled, and I'm sort of like happy to, you know, see the evidence of it if it does. But my base case, again, like for the application layer in crypto, it comes down to value transfer is what we're doing here, right? Like the purpose of these systems is to move money around And money can be defined as stablecoins, and money can be defined as like fun new assets that like people have never heard of. And so, like a prediction market on The Bachelor, I think would crush it, right? Yeah. And whether it's the producers of that show, and you should talk to Unlonely, by the way, because they're running exactly this. They're doing a haunted house with contestants, and you can like vote on like things that are happening. So it's like that's the surface area, right? Like incentivizing new forms of engagement and attention, which is what like the Web 2.0 incumbent like platforms that we are familiar with are in the business of monetizing attention. I don't think you can replace attention and just say like we'll put money here instead. Like that doesn't work, right? Like you end up with Steemit and like bunch of weird adverse. You can't like directly plug in financial rails into all of consumer apps. You can, however, add on markets and asset creation and speculation in like thoughtful, interesting ways that you would not be able to do with Apple Pay or with a credit card transaction. Like that's the area, and that's where the bottleneck is. Like there aren't, and like maybe it's like part of the problem is that like people want to fund the next few L1s. Like I wish they'd stop doing that with like the founders, because the founders should not be trying to build new L1s. They should be trying to figure out how to make people bet on The Bachelor. And I think that's going to happen. Like things are always cyclical and they move in different directions. So yeah.
Can I be a little bit playful here, Shayon? Didn't you just like negate the Multicoin's third thesis on stage?
Which one?
I think the first thesis is that I'm forgetting, but the third thesis was basically like freeing up like people from like big corporations and like
to be clear, I think that's like listen. No one's gonna come up on stage and be like, I love platforms. Like I don't own as much Meta stock as anyone in the average retirement account, right? Like I don't care for these entities. I'm just saying like from a commercial kind of pragmatic, like as a founder, as an investor, I'm not interested in going after competing with direct monopolies. Like that's just not. If other founders want to do it, other investors want to back those types of things. That's amazing. That's just not what I'm interested in. I think there are pockets of interaction and pockets of kind of like product experimentation that are really interesting at the consumer application layer, and people should go for those. I just don't think like owning your data is a compelling story. Yeah. That's all I'm saying. I'm not negating any of our theses.
Okay.
And our theses are deliberately broad enough for me to not negate.
Yeah.
So.
All right. And one question to you, Ru. Out of like, you've been expressing that you're so into consumer DApps with your background as well, but you've made one of the latest investments you have made. It was actually infra. I mean, if we count L1.
Which one?
Bera
Oh,
Chain.
right, yeah.
And
Proud sponsor of this conference.
yes, we're a proud title sponsor for our conference as well, and like we are proud validator for Bera Chain as well.
Well,
so why?
Okay, so Bear's unique in that I think that they're like community first, which is a consumer, right? Like I think also if you look at a lot of the teams building on Bear, like you have obviously your DeFi Legos with like Kodiak and Infrared and these, but there are also teams that are quietly building new consumer cases like Puffpaw, which is controversial, but you know, that's obviously a lot of people can identify with vaping, whether it's a problem for them or not. And so I think, I think that they are infra, but they are probably most consumer facing in terms of like what they want to offer, you know, people. Yeah. Traders, devs, yeah.
Interesting. And I think the reason why I like Bera and Smoking is because like they are.
Sorry, this wasn't meant to be like a bear showing. Like I think they show themselves enough. Like, yeah, 10K at a party. Like wow.
But That's true. But like
Well,
at the same time, like,
Bear started off as an application, right?
Right.
Like,
Yeah.
Bear
Well, it was
an
the NFT
application
collection.
and it went into infra
Yeah.
and back into, it's like the snake that eats its own
Yeah.
tail.
Yeah.
I love those guys. They're great. We're not investors, but like,
I think like what Rue is attracted to could be like the way that they could actually they know in their DNA like how to attract. Like
They
and
understand
grab the
human
attention.
emotion.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Probably that's one of the things that you might be looking for, like from the founders when you're looking into consumer apps.
Yeah, I think, well, I don't think there's enough time on the stage to like pontificate all these thoughts, but yes, we want people to think about like just use cases or just like normal everyday behavior, and then start to think about like what that might look like on chain. So astrology as an example. You know, there are like this is like the meta. There's a lot of meta, right, on astrology, right? There's like, you know, on Instagram, there's like Scorpios and et cetera, et cetera. I think it would be really interesting to see what that looks like on chain, as an example. But yeah,
I mean, like in Korea, there's a
Right.
it's just like astrology, like MBTI.
yeah. Or blood type, right? Yeah.
Could be interesting. Could be interesting. I mean, thank you so much. I think we're gonna wrap up our today's session, and you guys, since you guys are wrapping up the whole journey, I want to hear your last comment in terms of like how we're going to shape the future together, like and like on the either it being for our consumer, we shouldn't really like care about this categorization. I think, like if you are, like if you could actually share your thoughts in terms of like how next year would look like. From your personal view and maybe your firm's view as well, and then like I'll just wrap up the whole session after that. Let's start off with Rue.
Yeah, I mean, I think we're all in the same boat, whether it's infra or consumer, right? Like we just sort of need to be taken like more seriously as a space. So like safety is important, I also think like just people having intentions of being like good actors, right? Instead of bad actors, like, and that really has nothing to do with like theses and stuff. That's just simply like good company building and just having good, a moral compass there.
yeah, I mean, I'm hoping that next year. Well, I think something you said is very, very important, which is like building applications and building for consumers means that there's a very different sort of standard discipline around building things that you don't necessarily need when your customers are developers, which most blockchain services or blockchains themselves, your core customer is a developer, right? Like that's who you're going after. If you're building a consumer application, you need to be really tight about like what's your funnel, like what's your engagement, like how do you run small experiments to make this better, how do you actually acquire users. I think the biggest thing that the space doesn't have enough of is talent that like knows how to do that and is like willing to like build consumer applications or applications of any variety really that are thoughtfully designed, that have gone through the rigorous process, that like the fact that like there's probably $100 million that goes into making a button move on Instagram, right? Like in terms of time and effort and resources. I should tell you that like there's real discipline around like how to build these things correctly, and like we shouldn't just be winging, like we shouldn't be winging it, and like it's 2024 and crypto UX is still miserable. Like it's just literally not there. So what I want to see is like more founders, and like I want to find ways of bringing more people who have that expertise into the space and make it exciting for them again. It usually happens when the prices go up, but we don't have control over that.
We gotta wait like 9 months.
Yeah, exactly.
For the defection from Web 2 to
right
happen.
now, yeah, all the good people, they're all building like AI systems, and we can't have that. We need those people betting on the Bachelor.
But crypto is the currency of the AI.
It is the
says
currency of the AI.
Naval.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, it's true.
Naval called it.
He's right.
I mean, did you see the Twitter meme that like we as a crypto people are saying like crypto is an AI's currency, and AI people like on the other side are saying what is crypto?
They don't think about us. They
Well,
do not think about
it's
us.
like a research like circle, jerk. It's it's a contest these days. But yeah, thank you for having us.
I mean, thank you so much for being here with us, like with our team, and thank you so much for everyone for staying out until like this late, in among the 700 other side events. And thank you, Shayon. Thank you, Nu. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you, John.